So welcome to this webinar. I would like first to thank our partner, AInBC, the Artificial Intelligence Network in British Columbia, for their invitation to share with you our 25 years of experience in SR&ED with this webinar on the subject of how AI companies can maximize SR&ED claims in a downturn. So we'll share with you tips on how to optimize your claim, especially during this time of COVID, the COVID crisis, but also at any time. So many of the advice we'll share will actually be lasting you for a long time. So this presentation will be available upon request as a PowerPoint file or as a video for replay. So as you're being recorded. So smile for the camera. So we'll start first by introducing who we are. First, our firm and us as speakers. Then we'll cover what is SR&ED. When I say cover, it's actually just a reminder of what SR&ED is all about, as this presentation is designed for people who already know about SR&ED at least a little bit. If not, you can later ask us for other events. The next section is aimed to please the CFOs among you, as we will go through the financial impacts of COVID-19 on your claims. And then the section to please the CTOs, which is more than half the turnout here. So on best practices for AI companies, mostly on the way to technologically present your content to maximize your chances of receiving your SR&ED. So after we've pleased everyone, hopefully for 45 minutes, we will reserve 15 minutes for questions. Now, in the meantime, feel free at any time to type your question in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Some questions will be selected for our panelists to answer. So Emergex for 25 years now has helped companies build technology companies. And we do that by financing their innovations and growth through government grants. We're really specialized in information technology. This is more than 80% of our clients, and the tax credits we claim are in that field. So we have a team of 15 employees and consultants, mostly computer scientists, engineers, and PhD. And the reason for these technical backgrounds is to better understand your technology. You who are actually focused on artificial, some of you at least focused on artificial intelligence projects with deep learning, machine learning, and natural language processing, and other fields and subfields of artificial intelligence that exist now and that will come out in the coming years. So we have clients in all these fields. I believe we have over 20 projects that we claimed in SR&ED with our different clients throughout Canada. Our historical success rate is 96%, which means that for every dollar we claim, only 4 cents is lost to the clause of the Canada Revenue Agency, which is CRA for short, and that after audits. And we attribute our success, so that success, to our good reputation with the CRA auditors on a personal basis. So as a firm, we have several distinguishing factors and added values. Among that, we offer corporate structure planning for the purpose of maximizing your tax credit long term. We also validate the rule of contractual payments for you, which are contractual relationship with clients and the subcontractors. And we have something that I believe is unique that I've never seen anywhere else, is that we have 3 and 4 hour seminars on technological issues of SR&ED and 3 and 4 hours seminars on the tax issues of SR&ED. And the objective here is to help your employees and internal resources better understand SR&ED so that you, on a daily basis, make sure that you make the decisions to maximize your tax credit long term. As for myself, CEO and founder of Emergex, I'm also a computer nerd. So I'm not a financial nerd. I'm an IT nerd. So bachelor's in computer science from University of Montreal with 30 years of experience in the IT industry, from startups, my own and startups of others, and to large companies and large telecom companies. And I am a certified project management professional from the Project Management Institute. My colleague here, Komi Sodoke, is one of our technology advisors. He is to receive soon his PhD in artificial intelligence and cognitive science from University of Quebec. And he has 10 years of practical experience in software development and applied research in AI. And with him, as with our other technology advisors, we hired people that have experience like developing software in companies, as we believe that enables them to better understand the real life issues that your companies face on a daily basis. We have our two other colleagues. I will not read their profiles, but they will be there to answer questions at the end. So they are our Q&A panelists. Eric Martin, who's a professional services director, and Salah Mayout, who's our SR&ED technology director. So now, what is SR&ED? We see SR&ED, although it is written SR&ED, and what that means is the acronym means Scientific Research and Experimental Development. So it is actually a subset of R&D, but although people have different definitions of R&D, for the purpose of the government program, the government has defined specific criteria to apply and to qualify to. And we'll see that in the following slides. So SR&ED, for short, is a financial incentive to encourage Canadian companies or companies in Canada to develop new or improved technologies, products, and processes. Commercial success is not required. So the idea is to encourage risk-taking from a technological and financial and commercial standpoint. This is why the tax credits exist. This is the objective. It's a fairly large program with $3 billion that the federal government hands out to 18,000 companies throughout Canada. Now, out of these $3 billion, there is $400 million that goes specifically to BC companies. Now, BC, the province, also itself adds another $70 million of tax credits. So first things first, how much money are we talking about? So the rates for SR&ED vary from CCPC to non-CCPC. So a Canadian private corporation is what most of you work for, so often small to medium-sized companies with Canadian ownership. So that's the most common by far type of company in Canada. The non-CCPC are typically foreign corporations or companies listed on the stock market. They're much bigger usually. Now, what you have is for a CCPC, for the salaries engaged directly in SR&ED activities, the companies can receive 2/3 of their salaries, eligible salaries, in tax credits. So that number is fairly high, and often people are quite surprised when I tell them these numbers. So when you think about it, it is really 2/3 of the salaries that are subsidized. For non-CCPC, larger corporations, often it's almost half that rate, but still it is significant enough for international companies to build their research centers in Canada. So this is also viewed as one of the success of the program. It brings in companies and creates jobs from abroad, but also it keeps jobs from smaller companies in Canada instead of being outsourced. Another category of expense that is eligible to SR&ED tax credits is the Canadian subcontractors. So their fees can be refunded to the tune of 1/3 and roughly 20% for non-CCPCs. So that already you can see there a first potential optimization we can recommend. It is to favor employees rather than consultants or freelancers, or if not, to convert these consultants or freelancers and employees, even if it's for a limited period. So you can double basically the rates that you get from them. So these combined rates from the federal, and these are combined rates from the federal and BC, but it's not just a pure addition, because there's a subtraction between them, and there's also a proxy allowance or a certain fixed amount that's allocated for fixed costs. But all this calculation we bundled in the simple number for simplicity's sakes. So you just have to remember 2/3 of salaries and 1/3 of subcontractors' fees is what you can receive in terms of tax credits. Now, between these two extremes, the big number and the small numbers, there's a whole spectrum of values, and that depends on different criteria, which I will not go over at this point. Now, to qualify to this generous source of revenue, a source of money, every project, every SR&ED project must meet 3 criteria at the same time. So first, as you encounter a problem, technological problem, you look for solutions of standard practice first, and when these solutions have been exhausted, you cannot resolve your problem. So this assessment and trials of existing standard practice solution is what we call the technological due diligence. Once you've achieved that, once you could not surmount the uncertainty with these standard practice solutions, this is what we call you meet a technological wall. This wall is the technological uncertainty, #1 criteria. And you will try to resolve this technological uncertainty by going through a systematic investigation, by experimentation, with the formulation of hypotheses and logical conclusions, the result of which might be positive or negative. It doesn't matter. Even if you fail in trying to resolve a technological uncertainty, your project still qualifies for SR&ED. And actually, it's even easier to qualify it because it's a proof after the fact that it had technological challenges, since you could not even resolve them. So this end result is the technological advancement. It can be negative or positive, and it's the advancement of the knowledge base within your company. Now, the whole process there in the middle is the technological content, this systematic investigation, but also it is the documentation of the process and the step you took and the trials you did and the solutions you evaluated. So the documentation on a regular basis by your employees is an important process, an important part of the technological content. Now also, this criteria means that you have to have qualified people with sufficient experience and knowledge in technology to be able to advance science and technology. You cannot take somebody with no technical training and make that person try to experiment, because that person is still not educated enough technologically to really advance technology at the forefront worldwide or company-wide. So once you're out of the maze, you have to avoid stepping out into another maze, which could be an audit by CRA. But that, defending or preventing an audit from CRA would be the subject of a whole new webinar for another time. Now, the section to please the CFOs among you, and actually to please anyone around here. So how COVID-19 impacts your claim. Of course, the virus itself has an impact in terms of disruption of business, but what we mean here is the government aids are generous, but they will affect negatively your SR&ED tax credits. But still, at this point, let's say that our recommendation is do not delay your claim. SR&ED is still a priority for CRA. Although in the first weeks of the crisis, there were delays in issuing checks from the CRA because the employees were not working, normally. Now the directive has been sent to all the employees of CRA is just make SR&ED a priority, make sure that the processing of SR&ED claims is expedited. As indeed, CRA is prioritizing refundable tax credits. And CRA has announced publicly that there will be no new reviews or audits for now. So out of these 3 points, the net result is checks are received sometimes only days after filing a SR&ED claim. So the objective from the governance point of view was, since we're going to support society, people, and companies, and we're going to spend billions of dollars to help them, we might as well, with existing programs, expedite the process so that the cash goes out as fast as possible. And that's the objective here. But now that doesn't mean that you have a free pass. It means that the audits may be done in the coming months or years instead of right now. So you have to be super careful, as the money you receive could eventually be questioned later, and you may face a situation where you could ultimately reimburse these tax credits. So watch out, CRA reserves the right to come back later. So you file fast, but file well. Now, to apply to these government emergency aids, you have to go through the electronic means that is called the My Business account with CRA. Now, if you don't already have such an account, do it now. It takes just 2 weeks to get it, to open it. And the CRA emphasizes the need to ask these subsidies electronically as much as possible, as there will be no face-to-face communications for the coming months. Now, keep supporting documents if you applied to emergency aids, and of course to SR&ED as well, because in both cases, the government seems to be very generous and very quick in sending checks to keep companies alive. But eventually, we will have to demonstrate the needs for this money, and to demonstrate that the companies who asked it were eligible. So these emergency plans from the governments include the very generous 75% Canada emergency wage subsidy. So this very generous refund of employee salaries is conditional to a reduction in revenues of 15 to 30% during the months of the crisis. An even broader subsidy is the 10% temporary wage subsidy for employers. So it is less generous, 10%, but is broader, all employers can apply to. So they have different purposes and situations, these two programs. But what they have in common is it means that part of the salaries are subsidized. So in virtue of the principle of no double dipping, these subsidized salaries cannot be subsidized a second time by SR&ED tax credits. So that's where the main impact will come as you file your SR&ED claim next year. So what you have to do is these subsidies have to be deducted from the eligible wage proportionally to the time spent on SR&ED activities. And again, I'll give you an example in the following slides. Other programs are the Canada Emergency Response Benefit and the Work Sharing Program. The first one pays employees or former employees as they lost their jobs. And the second one is is helping employees that actually accept to work less hours in the week to be compensated through the employment insurance program. In both those two cases, the impact obviously is kind of obvious, because as the employees are not working in your company, they do not receive salaries, and therefore they're not eligible to SR&ED. So tax credits are actually based on the salaries. No salaries, no tax credits. And then what happens after the crisis recedes? The question is, how are your companies going to react? Will they simply delay the R&D projects? If that is the case, the R&D projects are pushed back, the salaries are paid later, and of course the tax credits for next year will be reduced, because these monies are actually pushed a few months down the road. But you could take a different approach, which would be, as employees come back to work for your companies, you could actually fast track your projects and therefore increase the intensity or the percentage of time devoted to SR&ED. So if you do that, you may see next year limited or no impact on your SR&ED tax credit as you file them. Now here's an example with the most interesting program, the 75% Canada Employment Wage Subsidy. So its impact on SR&ED tax credits. Let's assume we have an employee paid $2,000 per week, round number. So that's $104,000 per year. So in that case, that employee, for that employee, the employer would receive $847 per week. This is the maximum, which has been determined by the government. So that means that most of the salary still is paid by the employer to the employee. And that salary is fully eligible to SR&ED. So only the part, the $847, is the part that is being carved out because of the subsidy. This is going to be removed and carved out from your SR&ED claim. So let's assume in this scenario that 60% of the time of the employee is devoted in SR&ED. So there's $62,000 for which we would calculate 64% tax credits. Let's assume that the company is applying for the full 24 weeks of the subsidy. What we would have now without the program is $10,000 of tax credits paid by BC and $30,000 paid by the federal. Now, if we add to the mix the employee wage subsidy, then you reduce by roughly $1,000 the credits from BC and $4,000 the credits for the federal. So what you see is the net impact. So instead of 64% tax credit rate apply on $62,000 of eligible salary, you have a rate of 56%. So basically, the impact is much less than you might think. You know, carving out 75% of salaries might lead you to believe that 3/4 of the tax credit would be lost, but it's not the case. And one of the reasons here is that most of the salary of our guy or girl is not affected by the subsidy for most of the year. So the main takeaway here is it is worth to claim SR&ED. It's always worth, but even now it's worth to claim SR&ED. So there's still another $20,000, the wage subsidy itself, that adds up to the tax credit. So another example here, let's say we have a more junior employee with $1,000 per week. In that case, 75% means that a full 75% of the salary will give us $750 per week. So we don't reach the ceiling of 847. We have the same hypothesis here, 60% of the time devoted to SR&ED and 24 weeks. So you see to the right, $31,000 per year is the amount of salaries that is subject to to the R&D tax credits. So this is the number with which we normally apply the 64% calculation. So again, before the wage subsidy, we have the numbers that are exactly half of what we had on the previous slide. No surprise, half the salary, same, same 60% devoted to SR&ED, same 64% SR&ED tax credit rate. So half the numbers. Now the difference happens to the right, where we see that we again lose roughly $1,000 from BC and $3,000 from the federal. But now the rate, the effective rate, is 50%. So out of $31,000 that you see on the top right, there's 50%, which is the now effective rate for tax credits, or $15,000. So why did we go from 56 from the previous slide to 50 now? Well, if the tax credit rate decreases, it is because a greater share of the salary here is affected by the wage subsidy. So every salary is subsidized. It is not available anymore for SR&ED. So again, still, we have $18,000 with the wage subsidy. So it still is a very generous combination. Now, I will pass the torch to my colleague, Komi Sodoke, who will go through some of the best practices for AI companies and share some of our advice on how to optimize your claim in this new context of AI companies with some specific issues.
Thanks, Pierre. Hi, everyone. I will be presenting the best practices for AI companies. First of all, we all need to understand the purposes of the SR&ED work. Basically, there are three main purposes for the SR&ED work. The first one is a basic research. Okay? The basic research is fundamental research that is performed typically in a lab setting without a specific application in mind. The second purpose here is applied research. So those applied research are also advanced and scientific research, but with a specific application in mind. As you know, AI is still in its early stage of fundamental application. This means that there is still room to do applied research in those fields. For instance, we have here a project about a novel machine learning approach for classification of emotion and polarity in sentiment. The title and the description of this project suggests that we will create a new machine learning approach. So this means that this project is an applied research. If this is the case for your project, just remember to mention that very clearly in your T661 form. The last purpose is the experimental development. So this kind of development is also a SR&ED project, but with a specific application in mind. It does not require to build or to create a new process or new technologies. Most of the AI related project falls under this kind of category of project, because in most of the AI projects, people use, customize, adapt existing method or techniques in order to achieve a technological advancement. I have a couple of scenarios here that are part of our recent project that we have done with our client. The first project is about application of AI principle for outlier detection or anomaly detection in a huge amount of data collected from multiple point of sale systems. As you see here, we are using AI principle and techniques, but to achieve a specific goal. Same thing for this project. The goal is to develop and train a real-time facial recognition AI system with a success rate using a restricted subset of reference image. The key here is to know that we are using, of course, well-established techniques for facial recognition, but we want to improve the success rate, and also we want to reduce the amount of reference image that will be used for the training phase. Finally, we have a project here about using those kind of techniques also as a recommendation engine for information using distributed data source and using natural language processing. Again, here, the same principle apply. We use AI technique to have a technological advancement and also to provide solution. There are many axes that can be involved in AI shared project. For instance, you can have machine learning, natural language processing, cognitive computing, expert system, robotics, computer vision, speech recognition, ontologies, and semantic web or big data. Of course, this is not an exhaustive list, but the key things to remember here that all those application or techniques or domain are not mutually exclusive. So you can use, for instance, a machine learning approach in a big data project, or you can use a machine learning approach in an NLP project. All of that will make completely sense for your need. Now, I want to clarify that it's not all AI-related activities that are shared. For instance, data collection alone, a standard data collection process, model training alone, learning AI techniques or technologies, using existing AI model without modification. Guys, the baseline here for you is to ask yourself if the activities is just a well-established techniques, approach, or methodologies in the field of AI. If this is the case, this could be a standard practice and it could not be eligible as a shred. So the solution for that is to make sure that those kind of activities could be part of supporting activities for a well-defined AI project that have some technological uncertainty. For instance, here we have the typical case of data preparation. As you all know, in big data and in general data science project, data preparation using ETL or ELT can take a significant amount of time. So those processes are usually iterative and incremental process. And in those processes, sometimes you have to formulate hypotheses. You have to go validate those hypotheses. You have to take additional data. You have to extract new features. You have to combine data. So there are very challenging process which will justify in this case to be able to extract a shreddable activities out of that. Another one could be like you want to improve a model performance for a specific objective. So if this is the case, we all know that you need to have a result, to formulate hypotheses, to increase or improve that kind of result. Sometimes you have to fine tune your hyperparameters in your model. Sometimes you have to retrain model with new hypotheses. So those kind of activities also could be eligible. For your need also, you can have the need of combining existing well-established techniques in supervised, unsupervised, and reinforcement learning. All of that as well can be eligible. And finally, you can need to create ontologies to improve your knowledge base. So that list is not an exhaustive list, but the main takeaway here is to make sure that your activities have to have some kind of challenge, and also you need to have a well-justified AI-related shreddable project and justify the fact that all those activities are somehow diligent first and necessary work that need to be performed to achieve the objective. Documentation and traceabilities are the key to efficiently track all your eligible activities. So for that, we usually recommend to our clients to use well-established tools or platform like Redmine, Jira, Trello, Monday, and so on. You can even use here an in-house system. It doesn't matter. The most important thing here is to make sure that you have all the information to know who did when, what, and when. If you don't have a system in place yet, we can provide you a basic one as a starting point. If you already have one, we can also guide you to make sure that this system complies with the CRA requirement. Finally, this is the most important as well, make sure that the big advantage of your system is to be able to allow you to easily track or retrieve or group all those activities that could be SR&ED eligible, and based on that, you can use them to identify the problem to support your claim. So now that we know how to identify all the shreddable activities, we know the advantage of having a well-structured timesheet system. Let's see how you can maximize your claim from there. First of all, make sure that your activities have a granular yet compilable structure. Second, make sure that you use the same word or terminologies to present or to describe similar activities. Third, make sure also that your activities can be combined in a high-level structure. And finally, keep and track when those activities has been done, and if you face any challenges or tech issues when you are doing those kind of activities. In these basic scenarios that I presented here, you see that we have different activities. We have data wrangling activities in different days, but those data wrangling activities, could be combined inside a high-level activities for the project. Same thing, we can have here different tasks, and all those tasks can be combined easily in a high-level activities. And also, as you notice that we have the hours that has been devoted to each activities, and we have the sign or the marker here if those activities require or push the team to have a tech issue or challenges. So by using all those information, we can be able to gather efficiently everything that we need in order to be able to claim or use them inside a claim for SR&ED activities. So once you have all those activities in place, you need to create an activity tracking sheet. This kind of sheet is not available by default in most of the software used for project development, but you need that as an intermediate document between your timesheet system and your SR&ED writing. So it will provide you the raw materials to support your claim. What kind of information you need to have in those sheets? First, you need to be able to group together all the activities that have the challenges or technical difficulties that you face. Make sure then that you can group all those activities inside well-defined technological problem. Of course, you don't need to have one problem. You can have 1, 2, 3, 4 problems. But the key here is to make sure that you have all those activities and make sure that you related them to a well-defined technological problem. And finally, make sure that you have some kind of outcome out of the process. This outcome, of course, can be that you reach the expected result or you have a failure. So it doesn't need to be a success every time. And if you have a failure, please just mention what are the lessons learned to make sure that the same process will not be repeated over and over again. So now that we have all those information and we know how to track all those activities, from there, how can we choose our project, client project, and how can we move from there to a SR&ED project? First of all, as you all know, in most of the IT companies, we have two main categories of projects. The first one are the client projects. The second one are internal projects. Of course, the typical mistake to avoid here is to take a single client project or internal project as a SR&ED project. The reason for that is that most of the client projects have a specific deliverables, but SR&ED project is mainly based on technological axes. Here we have several client projects and internal projects. As you can see, the client project 1 and client project 2 give us the material to choose the first tech axis. Client project 2 give us the material to have the second tech axis. And from those two tech axes, I have all the material to support my first SR&ED project. Same thing, I have here one internal project and two client projects to support that new tech axis. As you see here, the client project 1 is part of those two tech axes. So it doesn't necessarily have to be like you have one project and one tech axis. No, a same project can contribute to different tech axes. And from there, I can come up with my second SR&ED project. You will probably notice that here I have some project left. It's not all your project that needs to be part of your SR&ED document. If the project does not have all the tech document or tech issue to justify to be able to be a SR&ED project, no need to use them in that case to support those kind of projects. Now I will hand the presentation to my colleague.
Great. Thank you very much, Pierre and Komi, for your expertise and insights. So that concludes our formal presentation of how NI companies can maximize SR&ED claims in a downturn. And so now, as Pierre mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, this is our Q&A session. And we have some kind of interesting questions asked by our attendees during the presentation. And I wanted to share them some actually and ask to our panelists to answer them verbally. Okay, so and for the other question that we are not going to answer them now, so don't worry, we will come back to you by email with a more comprehensive answer at your question. Okay, so first question, I think it would be for Eric. Is it still worth it to combine it with the SR&ED claim if I apply to the 75% subsidies?
Yes, Benjamin, thank you for your question, to answer the question. I think Pierre already really answered that. If you look at the slide on page 27, where he did the examples. So it always depends on the SR&ED ratio that you claim and the ratio of like the amount of salaries that you get. But in any case, the short answer here is yes, it always is worth to claim SR&ED for sure, 100%.
Excellent, thank you. Next question, it's for Salah. Does CRA tend to accept AI projects more?
Thank you very much, Benjamin. This is a very good question because we can presume that nowadays CRA sees more AI projects, which is normal. That's pretty much the tendency that we see in the IT field, but that doesn't necessarily mean CRA accepts more AI projects. The reason is that the criteria that CRA uses to judge or to determine whether a project is shreddable or not stays the same, whether it's an AI project or not. So yes, CRA sees more AI projects, and again, we are to presume that a big chunk of it are gonna go through and will be accepted. But again, the criteria stays the same. So the way CRA judges a project is not different whether it's an AI project or another project.
Okay, thank you. Another question for you, Salah. Could the time spent integrating an API or getting used to a platform is shreddable?
Um, um, it all goes back to what is a shred project and what it starts from. A shred project always starts with a technological uncertainty. So if as part of resolving this technological uncertainty, you guys have to spend some time doing some integration or getting used to certain platform, then we can certainly consider part of that time. And again, I insist on the word part of that time as being potentially supporting activity for your shred project. Komi explained the difference between a shred activity versus a supporting activity for shred projects. So those type of activities are closer to be a supporting activity than being directly a shred activities.
Fantastic.
Was the question also about learning? I thought I heard about learning about an API. So would learning an API be considered shred? Am I allowed for questions?
Again, it goes back to the same question that was asked about could the time spent integrating an API or getting used to a platform. It's the same principle. So part of it could be potentially not alone, learning a technology or a platform or how to use an API is not in itself a shred activity. But part of it could be considered as a supporting activity in a shred project. So that's the main difference.
Great. Next question, more about the CRA. During the presentation, Pierre mentioned that a CRA speeds up the shred claim process. And I have a question for you, Eric. How long does it take now to receive shred credits?
Yes, as Pierre mentioned already, at the moment we live exceptional times. CRA tries to get the cash fast to the companies. For low-risk claims with a history of shred claims, it can be as fast as a few days after the submission of the income tax return. It means really, really fast. Otherwise, I would say you can expect to get the cash between 1 and 2 months after you submitted the claim. In regular times, CRA has 180 days to assess the claim. For low-risk claims with a history, it can be pretty fast as well, but as soon as your claim is selected for an audit, it can take several months until you get the tax credits. Companies who claim for the first time will be visited in 90% of the cases by CRA, either for a first-time claimed advisory service, FTCAS. That means the CRA will explain the program, but the tax credits will be accepted as filed, or for an audit. The commitment by CRA is, however, that you, after 60 days after you submit the claim, that you will get news regarding if you are selected for an audit or not.
Okay, great. I have another question for you, Eric. If I work with US consultant, are expenses for this kind of consultant working for a shred project?
No, as a rule of thumb, you could say that you always need somewhere a T4 statement to be allowed to claim shred. That means that somebody has to pay income taxes in Canada.
So that could be an employee or the employee of a subcontractor.
Yeah, that means the employees have to be on the payroll of a Canadian company, and the same applies to Canadian subcontractors. The work performed by the subcontractor has to be done by employees on his payroll.
Thank you very much, Eric. Another question from Mike. I think this one is for Salah. What stage of a startup passes the uncertainty-related criteria?
Well, actually, the uncertainty criteria is really related to the technology or the underlying technology that you guys use to develop or build or construct your solution. So the uncertainty is not related to at what stage the startup is in terms of a company. So as long as the uncertainty is legitimate from a technology perspective and regarding the technologies that you use, then at this point you have a potential SR&ED project that could be filed or that could be presented to comply with CRA's requirement.
Okay, thank you. Next one is for Kami, and this is a long one. I'm gonna read it, okay? In the context of a machine learning application, selecting and preparing training data for an AI model can be a very long and difficult phase of work, even if standard AI libraries are used. The question is activity related to training machine learning models eligible for SR&ED?
Yes, the main thing here is to know that those kind of activities can be claimed as a supporting activities. So what you need to do is to make sure that these activities will not be presented just like a simple standard process. To do that, first you need to identify some challenges in your process. As we all know, data preparation and also training a model in a machine learning project could be time consuming and also require you to formulate hypotheses, to get additional data, to merge your data, to extract new features, and sometimes to do activities like reduce dimensionality and so on. So basically, there are many challenges and issues that you can face that can push you to formulate hypotheses. And from that hypothesis, you have a technological challenge. And from there, you can justify that these kind of activities are supported activities for your claim.
I would like to, if you don't mind, I would like to add something on that is the proportion of supporting activities in AI project is naturally bigger than what we see usually in an IT project. So don't be surprised if, if a big chunk of the activities that you guys do are related to such activities, like as you said, the example is very good, training a model or extracting data to actually train a model is something that we see a lot in AI projects. So it is natural and understandable to have a bigger chunk of those supporting activities. But again, to go back to what my colleague Komi said, is that it is not viable to present a SR&ED project that is only about training a model or extracting data. This is not viable.
Excellent. Actually, I have another question for you, Salah. Are all AI projects SR&ED eligible, or does it depend on the underlying technologies?
It's definitely related and depending on the underlying technologies. There's one thing that you always need to keep in mind. SR&ED project always starts with a technological uncertainty. That means based on the underlying technologies that you use for your project, you need to identify and pinpoint a limitation of those technologies. Once you do that, then at this point, you can consider a SR&ED project. So yes, it is really related, not because of the nature of the project, but it's really related. SR&ED is all about the technologies and the issues that you have with the technologies.
Okay. And another one for you, Salah. Does my project need to span the full fiscal year to be claimable in a SR&ED project, in a SR&ED claim?
Not necessarily. Actually, a SR&ED project can eventually cover the full fiscal year, but sometimes it might take a shorter period of time for you to resolve your technological uncertainty. So if, for example, you identify your uncertainty, technological uncertainty in January, and by June or July, you're done with it and you solved it, then at this point, your SR&ED project stops there. The SR&ED project stops whenever you have either solved your technological uncertainty, or if you're at the end of your fiscal year and you didn't solve it actually. So The duration of a shred project is really related to how long it takes for you to solve your technological uncertainties.
So indeed, if I may add to that, so the beginning and the end of a shred project is typically completely unrelated to the fiscal year. And actually, if your shred project ends with the fiscal year, it's even like strange that it happens this way, because you don't know how long it will take to surmount your technological uncertainties and how long and how many experimental steps you will have to do to resolve it. So typically it's quite independent from the fiscal year. Now, during a specific fiscal year, you will typically have 1, 2, or 3 different shred projects that are living together, and some will have started during the year, some will have started the year before, some will start or some will continue in the following year as well. So it's like a portfolio of different shred projects that start, grow, diminish, and end. So there's a mix like this at any time. So this is the way you can actually make sure that even though a project is finished, you can still claim shred tax credits in the following months, not on the project that finished, but on another project that's being started.
Thank you, Pierre. And I think the last question will be for Eric. Is it possible to claim shred even if we were paid by a client?
Yes, that's a really good question. Try to be brief with my answer. If your employees worked on a shred activities in Canada, either you or your client are entitled to claim shred tax credits on these activities. As soon as I have shred activities, somebody is entitled to claim. However, you have to do an evaluation of which of the companies is in better position to claim shred, because only one of the companies is entitled to claim shred on the same activity. Indicators are, for example, is your client a Canadian company and thus entitled to claim shred? If not, the answer is you are entitled to claim shred. Other questions could be who controlled the experimental development. That means who can explain what happened and what the uncertainties are. That's an indicator. Who can tell the story? Who assumed the technical and financial risks? Who owns the IP? Things like that. In any case, we strongly suggest adding a paragraph to your standard contracts which addresses shred, or to discuss the issue when you negotiate the contract with your client. If you need or if you want some, we can provide an example of such a clause, for example.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Eric. So I think we've done with the Q&A session. And as I already said, if you have any other question, you can definitely reach us. So Pierre, if you want to conclude this webinar.
Yes, please. So thanks to all the participants who attended. I hope you found it interesting and even entertaining. And thanks, of course, to our dear partner, AInBC, the Artificial Intelligence Network in British Columbia. So hi, Norma. Hi, Steve. I see that you are in the audience, Norma at least. To conclude, I would say that this presentation, again, as a reminder, will be available upon request as a PowerPoint file or as a video for replay. So we will probably share with you by email how to connect with this information. And if you have any question, feel free to contact us. You have our full coordinates here with email, website, and social media. Thank you all.